there, and welcome back to another Miraculous Ladybug video. And today I want to talk about the overall arc of Adrien Agreste across the show, and that perhaps that in a way, it's managed to end up fairly decent? Or at the very least, ended up in a way that actually sort of makes a lot of sense. Now that might well be a very controversial sort of statement. After all, let's not forget that for a lot of fans, Adrien's role in the story, and honestly his persona in general over time, has been a source of annoyance, discontent, and simmering rage, especially in the days of late Season 3 and Season 4, and then returning with a vengeance at the end of Season 5. I need to own up to this one as well. I'm one of those many salty fans that wept their salty tears at how I felt like Season 5 well and truly massacred my boy. However, it's been a long time since all that happened. We saw the final episodes of Season 5, the final chapters of that first saga of the show, almost 2 years ago now. This means there's been a lot of time for the dust to settle on his arc and his story, plus we have some more information about him that dropped in Season 6. With this, I think you can safely say that against the odds, his arc in hindsight has fallen perfectly into place as a realistic depiction of what a teenager in his situation might behave like and what he might do. Everything that he does and the way in which he often behaves actually works if this was a series that was meant to be grounded in reality with extremely realistic characters whose personalities and arcs are supposed to feel real, not fantastical and not goofy. That being said, I'm not going to necessarily say that this means the arc and storytelling are good in any way. It is good in parts. I think we can all agree on that. Otherwise, why would the show ever have taken off? Why would it be popular? But there are issues all the same, and if you hate it, then that's valid. For me, looking back on it now, I think the main problem is that it takes way too long to get to the point of what's going on and resolve various different arcs. The seasons are very long, with a whole lot of episodes, and so especially in those early Monster of the Week seasons, specifically talking about Seasons 1 and 2, and even parts of Season 3, it felt like the show was well and truly stagnant. If his arc had been slapped into a more concise show that wrapped up the Agreste arc faster, then I think there'd be less criticism leveled at the story in this specific regard. It probably also doesn't help that this show has one of the worst release schedules in recent years, sometimes taking months-long breaks between episodes, which simply gave the audience time to stew on things and think about how slow everything's developing as a whole. At the same time, the problem is the show doesn't properly explore these aspects with an Adrien point of view, and so it comes across as largely being out of nowhere when he behaves a certain way. They don't have that added context. The reality is that the show is largely framed from the viewpoint of Marinette/Ladybug. As much as people like to point at the long-form title of the show to try to claim that this means Cat Noir is totally on the same level of prominence, we can see from the actual writing of the show that in the eyes of the creative team, this is clearly not the case. Marinette is a spot above Adrien, and the majority of the episodes and overall storylines have her at the centre. Nothing made that more clear than in the finale of Season 5, where she solos Gabe whilst Adrien's crying in London. I think by that point of the show, if there was any character who came close to being an equal lead to Ladybug, it was going to be Gabriel Agreste, not his son. Also, I think I want to mention before I go any further, I'm not trying to glaze the writers with this video. I'm not going to try to convince you that they're creative geniuses that have been masterminding this grand story this whole time. No, that is not the case. If anything, they have lucked into this over the years. I have no doubt for many of the plot points or for many of Adrien's actions, they didn't have some overarching creative vision in mind for his characterization. This is not high literature. This is a Wallace and Gromit desperately laying down the train tracks before the train rolls through style of writing. And it shows across the many seasons and story arcs that drop in out of nowhere at times. Regardless though, the characterization is still there, and when you look at it, it works as a whole, at least in my opinion. At the end of the day, you might take a listen to what I have to say and tell yourself, oh, poor old smarty pants. He's completely lost the plot. He's desperately trying to prove why this character has not been ruined beyond repair in his own copium-fueled fever dream video. If you come out of this video thinking that, then fair enough. To each their own. But regardless, here we go. Adrien Agreste is, in my eyes, a very realistic character that behaves in the way a lot of traumatized characters would in his position. But I suppose we'd better go through the whole downfall of the writing in order to get my point across. I'm not sure what to begin with, really. Do we need to touch on what made Adrien's character popular in the first place? At the very least, we don't need the full synopsis. I think we're all fans here. I'd say the majority of it comes from his persona of Cat Noir. I know Adrien's all well and good, but we know the popularities from the cat. When do we reckon, though, is the time when Adrien/Cat Noir has the big shift? When did it all start to slip away? Is it around Season 3 at some point, or is it before that? Season 1, I think the dude is fine for the most part. It's Season 2 that the cracks began to appear. This is the first sighting of nice guy Cat Noir, where he starts to not take no for an answer when it comes to his love for Ladybug. Season 2 and 3 also start to see much more of a pivot towards Ladybug exclusively being the primary top-level hero, with Cat Noir being a perennial loser who the villain beats up to build some prestige to make Ladybug look nice and strong. That well and truly became the formula by Season 4, and Cat Noir became even more massively whiny and sad and downtrodden as he got shunted to the side in favour of the likes of Alia as Ladybug's number one confidant. At the same time, in his Adrien persona, as the seasons progress, he gets dominated more and more often by his dad, to the point that he's a bit of a simpering loser by the end of Season 5. On the face of it, you can look at this and say, really? Really? This is how you're going to do my boy? This is how you're going to treat him with the writing? What the hell is this? I think you would be right to think that way. As I said, it's only now in Season 6 that I think we can retroactively look back on things and think, oh yeah, that makes sense for his character, I suppose. He would behave like that based on things that have gone down for him over the course of the show's run. Doesn't make it good though, but we'll come back to that. So, what are the major areas of discontent we need to address next with Cat Noir as a character? Yes, we've discussed his downfall, but can you break that up into something that can be analysed? For me, there's three major categories where I used to look at the writing for Adrien and just sigh. These are his creepy disregard for Ladybug's boundaries, which started to make itself known throughout Season 2, got absurdly bad during Season 3, and parts of Season 4. The next is his becoming sidelined as a major hero and becoming a bit of a cannon fodder crybaby in his hero persona, and then there's also him being a very weak-willed individual when it comes to his father and defying him, to the point that in the finale he just cries alone in the jail cell his dad chucked him in, and tells Plag to take the miraculous to somebody else. There are probably some other smaller areas of the story that get people in their feelings too in regard to Adrien's character, but I'd argue that between these three big factors, that is the source of the majority of the salty tears. I suppose we'll just work through them in the order I listed, right? Which means first up, we need to talk about the creepy writing in regards to the way in which he interacts with Ladybug at times. Forceful, and like I said, creepy. A massive, nice guy that sulks when she won't date him or kiss him and lives in the land of denial that she's eventually going to snap out of it and acknowledge that she loves him and they need to be together. Just as I just want to take a side road and remind everybody, there used to be a massive, and I mean massive subsection, or at least a very, very vocal subsection of the community that would always be upset at Ladybug for mistreating Cat Noir. Because of course, this woman owes it to always be nice and friendly and affectionate to the guy that crosses boundaries she repeatedly reminds him exists. My god, did proto-Andrew Tate fans used to lurk in this fanbase or something? Miraculous Tatybug! Also, let's next acknowledge that writing your secondary main hero to be a creeper who pushes romantic boundaries with no real repercussions is absolute dogshit writing. Realistic or not, who actually thinks this is a good idea? Same with Marinette. We have this character who has a really deep crush that causes her to act a bit crazy when she's jealous, okay? You know, that feels reasonable. We've seen that before. Oh, but she also has his schedule. She sniffs his pillows, breaks into his house, regularly stalks him, tries to sabotage other girls who like him, knows his every interest, his every move, and she's only known him for a couple of months. Right. So she's a villain, right? Oh, no. She's the main hero. Pfft. Why would you write this? That's not what you want from your romantic leads. However, just because it sucks, and it does suck, doesn't mean it doesn't actually make a lot of sense when you dig deeper. Anecdotally, as in just from my experience, there are a whole heap of people that I've met on the surface that are popular and cool, friendly, awesome, social butterflies that have everything going for them. But then you see how they speak to or about women they're interested in, and it gives you some extreme ick and makes you give out incredibly heavy side-eye. I mean, think about how many people exist in celebrity spaces that pull off this really wholesome persona, only to have troubling aspects to their personality revealed underneath it all. But that's just one aspect and one direction you could take, and maybe it's too harsh to Adrien. Instead, when you look into Adrien's personal character history, you can see he probably doesn't have much of an idea about healthy relationship boundaries and how these sorts of dynamics should play out. Let's not forget, the show only takes place over the course of a single school year. Hence why it feels like everything goes so slowly and like he never moves on, he never changes. They have to stretch this shit out over the course of 5 seasons. So he's not going to change much from season 1 to 5 because of how compacted it all has to be. So you take a look at his life before school. He lived with his mum as his primary carer. His dad was never really around because he was always off. But when he was around, he was very distant with Adrien, as we see in Werepapas. He's not the type of dad that's teaching his child important life lessons. What was Gabe obsessed with instead? What could Adrien see? What was he always doing? Why, he's trying to save his sick wife from dying. That was what occupied all his time. That's what consumed his mind. This is Adrien's primary example of what romantic interest manifests as: undying devotion and borderline obsession that you cannot let go of. Gabe models this even after Emily's dead. He clearly cannot let go, and Adrien can clearly see that. So is it really so strange, or out of nowhere, that Adrien would exhibit these sorts of behaviours to begin with his first romantic interest? Not really. Kids pick up so much from their parents, and so Adrien following suit with this type of behaviour feels very true to life. On top of that, he lived an isolated existence without any real contact with other people outside of his immediate family, employees, and then Felix and Chloe. A lot of social development, I think, comes from our interactions with our peer group and other people like teachers, sport coaches, etc. With a reduced social circle, though, comes a less developed person who's less likely to understand when they're crossing social boundaries. Then again, for a lot of dudes, they're just going to cross those boundaries anyway, socialized or not. Really, it's lucky that Adrien comes out of his childhood being anywhere near as well adjusted as we see. By all rights, he should be an out-of-touch weirdo. It's a testament to Emily's parenting that he isn't. So yes, the creepy cat noir is sadly, I feel, an actually accurate portrayal that is supported by the backstory. It's just not really something you want to see in this type of show. We then come to cat noir being sidelined, taking a backseat in the narrative, especially during season 4. This one, I don't know if we can really address it in this video, can we? That's more a Marinette issue than anything else, isn't it? Something about her arc. But even then, if you look at it from her perspective, backstory and arc, it makes a lot of sense as to why she'd prioritize using her best friend Alia as her main support structure and confidant over Cat Noir. She is far closer to Alia, she knows her true identity and vice versa, which allows them to actually confide in one another and understand what the other's going through in a way that Cat Noir can't. On top of that, as we acknowledged, dude's creepy. I think it's very clear that Ladybug openly keeps him at arm's length because of that fact. When he simmers down and cools his jets, what do you know? Their relationship improves as a result. Who would have thought? Which brings me to him being reduced to what he was in the season 5 finale. I hesitate to say he was a spineless wimp because that's a bit harsh to use that language when talking about an abused teenager, but we all know what he was. It wasn't the most powerful appearance from young Adrien. It had been building for seasons. In season 1, he's a lot more confident as a character. You can see that. I think it's just lots of proof. Yes, his dad pushes back on him and controls him, but it doesn't quite feel the same as it does later on. As the seasons go on, though, it feels as if the story leans more and more into the Adrien neglect arc, where he's consistently crapped on by the story. Over time, it feels like his force of will becomes far weaker and weaker, not just because of the ring control, but overall his personality revolves around rolling over for whoever. But is this not normal behaviour anyway? His whole life has been one of control. He was kept isolated from the world with his sickly mother for years. When she dies, his dad permanently returns, but, he sucks. He's hugely distant. But at the same time, despite that emotional distance, this guy goes out of his way to make Adrien's life suck. He curates his schedule. He forces him to live a life he clearly doesn't want to. He makes it difficult for Adrien to socialise and live his life as he sees fit. He's extremely heavy-handed with punishment and cruel. He essentially tries to pimp out his son into a weird arranged marriage sort of thing against his will, then takes him away from his whole life to go to London, splitting him away from his friends and his beloved girlfriend. Shit, I wonder why over the course of the year he crumbled inwards on himself. On top of that, his mum had recently died, and his other maternal figure backed off from him and only started to reaffirm their bond once she was also clearly dying. One of his oldest friendships broke down as he realised that she's not a good person, and then he's also being headhunted and stalked by a horde of crazy fans. On top of that, his cousin Felix turns out to be a bit of a douchebag. This is the stuff that mental breakdowns and villain arcs are made of. Thus, on the surface, all of this makes so much sense. It feels like a realistic character progression, and the way he behaves just works. The problem is, it's not written in a compelling way at all. For the toxic traits he displays, the story doesn't adequately come to grips with why they're bad, why he behaves that way, and he doesn't have a journey to address them. Take Win or Lose, a Pixar series I'm currently enjoying. In that show, your main characters feel real. They have flaws. These form the crux of their stories. It informs their arc, that they can be likable people who are flawed, who make mistakes, who do bad things, and they don't always overcome them. They fall prey to them instead. But you see the journey, and you see the inner thoughts. You see their pain and their trauma. For Adrien's flaws and his trauma, though, it's never there. We don't explore that because his story is always in service to a different character, whether that's Marinette or whether that's Gabe. If there were storylines that followed up on why Adrien clings so tightly to Ladybug with no reprieve, or why he's crumbling under the weight of everything going on, it would be received far better. I know it would be, because people love an ooh-woo-wooby storyline, but there's never that deeper reflection on it. It's simply something that's happening to serve as a motivator or a consequence to whatever Marinette or Gabe have been up to this episode. Hence why it seems shit. The dude's arc on paper, if you read it out loud, would seem like this is an important POV character. But when you watch it play out, he is undercooked and lame. Plus, the show's so long that it feels even worse because you don't get any catharsis for literally years and years if you watched it live. I suppose at this point, I just have to leave you with the hope I've convinced you. So I'll remind you that these have all been my opinions, and I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of what I've discussed today? Do you agree with me? Maybe not. I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.